Welcome to the Network Plus Prepcast, your dedicated audio companion for mastering every objective on the CompTIA Network Plus certification exam. This series is produced by baremetalcyber.com. In episode 138, we explore one of the most foundational but often overlooked aspects of network operations: documentation. Network documentation provides a detailed, organized view of your infrastructure, from where cables run and what devices are connected, to how data flows across subnets and which users made recent configuration changes. Without documentation, teams rely on guesswork, memory, and outdated assumptions. With proper documentation, every action becomes faster, more accurate, and more secure. For Network Plus candidates, these concepts are frequently tested, especially when troubleshooting, reviewing changes, or preparing for audits. This episode focuses on three categories of documentation: physical diagrams, logical topologies, and operational records like audit reports. Together, these create a complete picture of the network, covering both the physical layout and the functional design. You'll also learn how to document device inventory, software versions, and configuration history, all of which contribute to disaster recovery, compliance, and efficient troubleshooting. On the exam, expect questions that ask you to interpret diagrams, identify documentation types, and determine how they support daily operations and long-term planning. Physical network documentation maps out the real-world layout of cables, ports, devices, and rack space. This documentation shows where each cable is terminated, what port it connects to, and which endpoint it serves. It includes details like wall jack labels, switch port numbers, and the physical locations of routers and firewalls. Physical documentation is crucial for tasks like cable tracing, equipment upgrades, or resolving wiring issues. The exam may test your understanding of what belongs in a physical network diagram and when that information becomes essential during maintenance or outages. Typical elements in a physical diagram include floor plans that show workstation drop points, patch panel layouts that identify connections from walls to switch ports, and rack elevation views that detail equipment placement within network closets. These views give technicians the information they need to locate a device quickly and understand how it's physically interconnected. On the certification exam, expect to be presented with sample diagrams or scenarios where physical documentation helps resolve a technical problem. Logical network documentation serves a different but equally critical purpose. Instead of showing physical paths and cable runs, logical diagrams represent how data flows through the network. These diagrams typically display IP addressing schemes, VLAN assignments, routing paths, and firewall boundaries. Logical documentation helps network teams review configurations, plan changes, and validate design decisions. On the exam, you'll be expected to identify elements of a logical diagram and understand how they relate to network segmentation and performance. Components commonly found in logical diagrams include Layer 3 devices like routers and multi-layer switches, their IP addresses and subnet ranges, and the relationships between VLANs. Wide area network connections and links to remote offices are also shown. This allows for a high-level view of how each segment communicates. These diagrams are especially helpful for troubleshooting routing problems or planning for expansion. On the exam, questions may require interpreting logical topologies and determining what device or layer is affected by a given change. Inventory records are an important component of documentation. They include details about devices such as model numbers, serial numbers, operating system versions, license expiration dates, and installed modules or accessories. These records help teams track what equipment is deployed where, how old it is, and whether it matches required software or hardware specifications. Tying inventory to physical and logical maps allows for fast cross-referencing when issues arise. The exam may include scenarios where accurate asset tracking is key to identifying unsupported hardware or outdated firmware. Configuration backups and change history records should be maintained as part of regular documentation. Device configurations should be exported and stored regularly, both for recovery in case of failure and for comparison during troubleshooting. Configuration files may also contain security settings, access credentials, and routing logic, so protecting these backups is essential. The certification exam may ask about the role of backup files and how configuration versioning supports operational reliability. Logs that track network changes and events provide crucial insight during audits and incident response. These records should include who made a change, what the change was, when it occurred, and whether it was successful. Documentation should also note whether approvals were obtained, particularly in environments with change control policies. These records support troubleshooting and compliance, and they enable retrospective analysis when outages occur. On the exam, expect questions that involve interpreting logs or identifying how change records contribute to accountability. Audit reports tie directly into compliance and security practices. These documents confirm that networks are following established policies such as proper access controls, password complexity, patch levels, and role-based permissions. Audit reports may be internal, generated by the organization, or external, as part of regulatory reviews. They demonstrate that device and user configurations meet organizational and legal standards. On the exam, you may be asked about the role of audit reports in confirming network health and identifying policy violations. Finally, software and firmware documentation is another key piece of the network puzzle. Keeping track of version numbers, approved platforms, and compatibility lists ensures that devices are not exposed to known vulnerabilities. This documentation also supports planning for lifecycle replacements, patch rollouts, and feature updates. The exam may include questions about firmware tracking and how software documentation supports both performance and security hardening strategies. For more cyber content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other podcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Documenting IP addressing is essential for managing network resources and avoiding conflicts. Organizations often use IP address management or IPAM tools or structured spreadsheets to track assigned and available addresses. Good documentation includes address ranges, device roles, static versus dynamic assignments, and DHCP scope definitions. Accurate IP records prevent duplication and simplify troubleshooting. During an outage or device failure, knowing which IP belongs to which system speeds up root cause analysis. On the exam, expect to identify how IP documentation supports network planning and stability. Labeling standards are a physical extension of your documentation system. Each device, cable, patch panel port, and wall jack should have clear, consistent labels that match entries in your diagrams and inventory. Standardized labeling helps technicians identify hardware quickly and reduces mistakes during maintenance or upgrades. Whether you're tracing a cable or swapping a switch, proper labels save time and confusion. The exam may include scenarios that show physical documentation tied to labeling or ask how labeling supports operational clarity. Access to documentation during incidents can make the difference between a quick recovery and a prolonged outage. If diagrams and configuration records are readily available, responders can immediately understand the device's role, connected systems, and upstream dependencies. Without documentation, teams rely on guesswork. Accurate diagrams and logs reduce diagnosis time, allow for coordinated response, and guide escalation. On the exam, you may be asked to evaluate how documentation supports incident response, or what type of document would be most useful in a given scenario. Sharing and securing documentation are both necessary for protecting operational data and maintaining usability. Centralized repositories, such as internal wikis or documentation portals, ensure that everyone uses the most current version. However, editing rights should be limited to approved users, while general access can be view-only. Critical documentation should be backed up regularly and protected from unauthorized changes or deletion. On the exam, questions may cover how to store documentation securely and which access models protect data integrity. Whenever a network change occurs, such as adding a new switch or segmenting a VLAN, diagrams and documentation must be updated. This ensures that maps remain accurate and useful. Version control allows teams to track when changes were made, who made them, and what was altered. Without updates, teams may operate on outdated or misleading information. increasing the chance of misconfiguration. The exam may include questions about maintaining documentation accuracy or interpreting outdated diagrams in troubleshooting contexts. Network documentation greatly improves team coordination. When diagrams and procedures are consistent and accessible, multiple technicians can collaborate more effectively. This is especially important in environments with rotating shifts or distributed teams. Documentation also serves as a valuable onboarding tool for new hires, who can learn the layout and protocols without relying solely on verbal training. On the exam, expect to match documentation roles to onboarding and team efficiency use cases. Documentation also appears frequently on the Network Plus exam in visual or scenario-based questions. You may be presented with a physical or logical diagram and asked to identify the network layer involved, trace a connectivity path, or diagnose a misconfiguration. You might also be asked to determine which type of documentation would be most useful in a given task. Be prepared to distinguish between physical layouts, logical routing designs, and configuration or audit reports based on the information presented. To summarize, good network documentation brings together physical maps, logical diagrams, inventory records, change logs, and audit data. These tools enable every other aspect of network operation, from planning and implementation to troubleshooting and compliance. Keeping documentation current and accessible ensures that teams can work quickly and accurately while protecting the integrity of the infrastructure. For the Network Plus exam, you'll need to understand documentation formats, purposes, and best practices as they relate to daily operational responsibilities. To conclude episode 130, remember that documentation is more than paperwork. It's the map, the guide, and the record that ensures the network is understood, maintained, and secured. Accurate diagrams, clear records, and updated logs are essential for both daily success and long-term growth. Whether you're troubleshooting a link or preparing for an audit, the quality of your documentation determines how effectively you can respond. On the exam and in the field, strong documentation habits are a hallmark of professional network administration. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Network Plus Prepcast, your trusted audio guide to the CompTIA Network Plus certification. This episode was produced by baremetalcyber.com. For more cybersecurity podcasts, books, and resources, visit baremetalcyber.com. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Bare Metal Cybersecurity Plus podcast. For more episodes, tools, and study support, visit us at baremetalcyber.com. And before you take the test, make sure to check out the practice questions in the book Achieve CompTIA Security Plus SY0-701 Exam Success by Dr. Jason Edwards. They cover every domain and are a powerful way to lock in your knowledge.